Some thought that the prevalence of post-polio, this was I think presented at either at the Warm Springs Conference or at one of the neurology meetings, that the prevalence of post-polio in the United States reflects the aggressive rehab that people got after their acute polio, stimulating nerve muscle connectivity, stimulating partially damaged nerves to grow back and to hook up to more muscles, creating a setting that was ripe for post-polio as those recovered motor units, those fragile motor units, declined over the years. In places where that type of aggressive rehab was not available, the incidence of post-polio, and specifically this was somebody from India who was presenting this, much lower. Obviously the residua from the acute polio were much greater, but because there was so little recovery, at least in part because they got so little rehab, or maybe the strain of polio they were experiencing, so little recovery that there wasn't much left to decline in later years. Okay. So it's almost like post-polio is an iatrogenic disease. But when I ask people, would you have given up those 30 years of walking? They say no. No way. No way.
I think it's fair to say that that most of the patients that we see, at least, are overachievers. I mean, they are used to just going above and beyond, and they set a goal and they're going to make it. And so it's a pretty driven population, which is very nice from the standpoint of compliance. When they set a goal and they agree that they're going to do something, they move forward and they do it. I think that every characteristic that anyone can look at that they see as an asset in their personality can also, in another situation, be a problem. And so that same kind of mentality makes it a bit difficult for some of these individuals to follow through, for example, on doing some peaceful relaxation before getting into bed. They're go, 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 sleep, get up, go, 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 go. And that might work through one's younger years, but when you start to get older and start to develop other issues, and then it's the sleep that starts to get eaten away. And so that's a basic part of sleep hygiene, is really going to bed in a relaxed, peaceful state. And that's kind of hard for some of these individuals to do, to kind of back up and relax.
In my experience, they often were extremely frustrated by the time they found us. Many had been misdiagnosed or had their cases mishandled in one way or another, most often dealing with people who really had absolutely no knowledge of post-polio syndrome, even though their names may be listed somewhere, where they might think that they did. So, people came to us after undergoing tests that were unnecessary, surgeries sometimes that may not have been necessary, and by the time they found us, they were so frustrated but also so incredibly relieved to know from the first phone call that they had found a clinic that really understands polio, and that's our focus. I think that it was extremely gratifying for them to just know that we existed and that finally there was a resource and someone who could actually help them. We have a psychologist here. Some people find that extremely helpful, to meet with a psychologist who really comprehends the extremely complex issues that polio survivors are coping with, which is particularly true for somebody who may have just understood for the first time that what they're dealing with actually is post-polio. Some people are told it's old age, or that they're crazy, or that must be some neurological condition that there's no name for, or they have chronic fatigue syndrome or what have you. So the psychological piece is a really important one, and it's something that every member of the polio team has some training on. Not that we're all psychologists, certainly that's not the case, but we all are well aware of what it was like to be a child during the polio epidemics and to be taken away from your family and put in isolation. And for some people, depending on where they lived, their parents could be 5-hour drive away. And this is before we had major highways, and it was a very difficult time for a lot of kids that had polio and a lot of families, and kind of bringing all that back when we were fitting somebody for a new brace, or even suggesting that they need a brace. You know, there's a lot that the clinicians are dealing with in addition to the actual physical piece of the, you know, the new weakness and the need for a brace.
And also the non-paralytic polio folks, it's like 2 to 1, you know, non-paralytic, non-clinically apparent polio, this flu-like, you know, might feel crummy, stiff neck thing, versus obvious muscle weakness or paralysis. Well, there were 2 studies, one in Los Angeles and one in New York, where these guys went through the polio wards and saw these non-paralytic kids and young adults, teenagers, and said, I'm not so sure about this non-paralytic thing. And they did manual muscle testing, and they found that about 40% of the ones who were diagnosed as non-paralytic had obvious muscle weakness. And if you got them up and walked them, you could see that they were not walking normally. So, you know, during the height of the epidemics, if you could breathe, you went home. You know, and when the epidemics were sort of middling, well, if you could move and looked okay, then you could go home, or you come into the hospital for a night and then you go back home. So again, we don't know how many people had severe damage, and the bottom line is that there is this spectrum from, you know, having the virus and having it do absolutely no damage to your central nervous system, or not even getting into your central nervous system, through minor damage through you're dead. And that's what polio really is, not the non-paralytic versus the paralytic. And it's a kind of reprogramming, because these, you know, polio kids, polio teenagers, even the polio adults, you know, as the years went on, the average age of the person who got polio got older and older, and nobody knows to this day why that's true. But regardless of how old you were when you got polio, these folks literally were brainwashed. You know, the March of Dimes posters were all over. You know, don't let your child become a cripple. Join the March of Dimes. Help us find the vaccine, the cure for polio. So, you know, they should have been vaccinated. You know, even in the 1930s when there wasn't a vaccine. If they weren't vaccinated, then once the vaccine came out and they got it, it should have cured them. Well, it doesn't work that way. It prevents you from getting polio. It doesn't cure the polio. So no matter how these people look at it, they messed up. You know, they did something wrong. They're wrong. There's something wrong about them. They go have, some of our patients have had 15, 20 surgeries. You know, and a lot of them say, well, you know, the surgeries were for the doctors, not for us. They wanted to train and, you know, screw around and see if this or that worked. We never recommend surgery for polio folks now. You can take a piece of plastic, make a very nice lightweight brace, or the new composite materials. You don't need to fuse the ankle. You know, the polio folks have had enough pain without going back and having more polio surgery.